Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Now, up in just a few minutes, we have our influencer segment brought to you by OGPay.com. And today, we're featuring the very famous Buck Sexton. He is a widely popular radio and television talk show host, an author, and a conservative political commentator. He's also the co-host with Clay Travis of the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show, which is a nationally syndicated talk radio show. And you can listen to them live Monday to Friday from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. Now, interestingly enough, us radio hosts have very colorful backgrounds. He's also a former CIA officer. His assignments included the Al-Qaeda-focused Counterterrorism Center and the Office of Iraqi Analysis. Pretty impressive stuff. Today, we're chatting about how liberal bias defines journalism and the distrust and instability it breeds into society. We'll also get his thoughts on the 2024 elections. Now, many people think the mainstream media have a liberal bias, yet media spokesmen usually deny such claims. So who's right? Is there a left-wing bias, or has the right wing conspired not only to influence the media, but also to create a false image of unfairness? Well, if media bias doesn't exist, if it's just conservatives making it up out of thin air, how do the following facts exist? Are you ready? The New York Times, the so-called paper of record, has not endorsed a Republican presidential candidate dating back 14 elections to 1956. That means endorsing Democrats George McGovern, Walter Mondale, and Michael Dukakis, who won a combined 12 states over 3 elections. Talk about a disconnect. Then you have the Washington Post, once home to the Woodward and Bernstein and the winner of 69 Pulitzer Prizes, has actually never endorsed a GOP presidential candidate in its entire history. Speaking of endorsements, before the 2016 presidential election, and therefore before the Trump era in Washington, 57 of 59 major U.S. newspapers endorsed the Democratic nominee that year. Yep. Some food for thought, my friends. And here to chat some more and give us his insight is the very famous Buck Sexton. Welcome to the show, superstar.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. This is your sweet spot. I know that you fact check and are honest in your output, especially on your show. There was a study recently from Harvard University that found 93% of NBC News coverage of Donald Trump's first 100 days in office was negative, matching CNN's negativity. Now, the aforementioned Times clocked in at 87% negative, the Post at 83%. Compare that, Buck, to President Biden's first 100 days, which delivered 59% positive coverage, according to the Media Research Center. Now, although the studies come from very different organizations, that's a 142-point swing from negative to positive. And this is despite inflation, skyrocketing violent crime, an insecure border, and an ongoing pandemic. What do you say to this?
Donald Trump's presidency was a sea change moment in not only the way the media thinks it does its job, but actually how they say that they did their job. So Trump created the first ever moment where the media said, it is so important for us to oppose this guy, right? It was so monstrous and scary to them that their job was no longer to be nonpartisan, that Trump was such an affront to the truth that in order to pursue truth, they had to be on offense against Trump. They openly said this at different major newspapers. CNN is a place where I had worked before the presidential election of 2016 as an on-air contributor. And then when Trump was running, I actually saw the place. It was like watching somebody who had always had a little too much to drink at parties and you knew had a little bit of a problem, all of a sudden now was drinking a bottle of whiskey at 10 a.m. every day. I mean, it turned into a total mess over there. And CNN has never recovered from it. I don't think ever will recover from it. And what you see today with Joe Biden is a media apparatus that increasingly is fractured, even among Democrats, meaning that they don't even know necessarily what the party line is supposed to be. Obviously, they're supporting Joe Biden, but in what way? and what's best for the Democrat Party, they have to do so much heavy lifting to pretend that this guy who's too old for the job and who on his best days 30 years ago was really a sub-mediocrity in politics and certainly as any kind of intellectual. They're trying to figure out what the base wants to see, and they don't even really know, which is why there's this collusion, dare I say, between congressional Democrats and the media to run all these January 6 hearings. Nobody who isn't obsessed with NPR and CNN and generally lives in New York, DC, or Los Angeles, nobody cares about the January 6 hearings that are going on, but the media is broken.
Oh, yeah. And I want to touch on the Joe Biden and the White House administration in just a second. But then there's the phenomenon of bombshells that dominate news cycles only to be debunked later, right? Like last year, we saw the media dubbed a reckless conspiracy theory story with Senator Tom Cotton claiming that COVID-19 may have come from a Chinese lab. And now, it was considered an absolute reality for some, and then it was in fact investigated, and it was found to be the case. Then you have Trump ordering park police in DC to use tear gas on mostly peaceful protesters. That was another huge story, but a Justice Department Inspector's General report later released saying that it wasn't true after all. Why is it that seemingly, Buck, every huge breaking news story that ends up being hopelessly wrong is originally weaponized against one party, in my opinion, the Republican, to benefit only the Democrats? Why do these mistakes only go in one direction?
Well, the leftist activists have taken over the newsrooms of every Democrat regime media outlet in the entire country. So and they used to be, they've always been Democrats. I mean, to be clear, you go back to the 1990s at places like CNN, NPR, New York Times. It was always Democrat heavy. But now the people who say there aren't two sides to the argument, who are Democrats who say the other side shouldn't even be able to speak, they're actually calling the shots. And that's a change that's happened really over about the last 10 years. And because of social media being willing to go along with this by shutting down dangerous, whether it's about elections or about COVID, I was shut down so many times on COVID issues by social media platforms. They never come back 6 months later and say, wow, you were right.
Yeah, no, they don't.
Turns out the shots don't stop the spread. Does anyone else want to have that argument with me now? Because I was saying they don't stop the spread last fall, and here we are now, and they're saying, oh yeah, they don't. But they were able to not only control the media outlets that create a lot of this misinformation, but then to pretend under the guise of misinformation policing that the big tech platforms were doing some kind of a social service when they were really just acting as the attack dogs for the activist left in the media, and that's what they've been doing all along. So that's a huge change. And you ask, or you bring up the stories that are untrue. It's a fascinating dynamic you see with true believer Democrats and leftists now, where it doesn't matter if it's untrue to them as long as it served the purpose in the moment.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
if they run a story and everyone needs to understand this, if they run a story at let's say MSNBC that Donald Trump is actually on the payroll of North Korea, and and North Korea has been giving him buckets of cash to crazy stuff, doesn't matter. If enough people are able to believe it at the time and it damaged Trump's reputation, even if it later is found to be untrue, the people who run the story, the people who believe the story, are in a symbiotic relationship of delusion. They're happy to have thought that Trump was even more evil than they previously believed. And it doesn't matter that it's not true.
Yeah, no, they don't care. They're just taking it and running with it. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and come back to Trump in just a sec. But let's chat what the White House's biggest issues are, starting with how Joe Biden's biggest problem is himself. It's Joe Biden. Joe Biden could do a lot by doing nothing at all, I say. And it appears that everything he has done is crippling the American economy and destroying opportunity. High inflation, supply chain issues, and increasing regulation. Yet there seems to be no introspection about the White House's radical agenda, right? We have last year, Biden started to do what he could do to destroy the American fossil fuel industry. He killed the Keystone XL Pipeline, which was actually earlier authorized by an overwhelming bipartisan vote in both the Senate and in the House. And that action outraged Canada, our closest ally. And if it had been completed, it would now be supplying about 830,000 barrels of oil a day from Canada to our refineries. And that's 4 times what Russia supplied to us. What do you say to this?
Well, it's fascinating to watch the Biden White House now try to both keep the wacko environmentalists happy, and they are truly wacko. I mean, this is a religious belief for them, and also tell the American voter that they had nothing to do with the rise in fossil fuel prices, that they have nothing to do with drop in exploration and production, or just a lack of the necessary exploration and production to meet U.S. demand domestically. So they can't have it both ways. I mean, you have Joe Biden's first day in office. He shuts down the Keystone XL Pipeline, which, for anybody who's wondering, the Obama administration even did a thorough State Department-led analysis of this. And eventually they were like, look, we don't like this, but the oil's coming out of the ground one way or the other.
Exactly.
So the CO2 emissions on a global scale, you know, it's like pouring the bucket of water in the pool, the deep end or the shallow end, it's still going in the pool, it doesn't matter. But ideologically, emotionally, it upsets them. So they shut that down. That's just one example, but it's a pretty clear one. Joe Biden ran on the campaign trail and said that we're going to phase out fossil fuels. We're going to get rid of fossil fuels. I mean, these are actually the ravings of a lunatic. And those aren't things that he's saying because of dementia. Those are things he's saying because that is what people who have been honestly brainwashed by this climate change catastrophism, that's what they want to hear. So he just says it. And that's Joe Biden's entire career is essentially, well, as we know now, selling access for the Biden crime family. But also before that, as long as he's been around, he's just been a mediocrity who tries to find the safest, most popular position within the Democrat Party and just ride that. That's all he does.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're looking at, you know, how they're governing the administration, very, you know, difference of opinions here. But in 2008, when President Trump embargoed Iranian oil, markets barely moved. Why? You might ask, well, because Trump carefully and very prudently arranged for our then allies, the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates, to increase their production and made sure before he did it that our allies would be supplied, and they were. Biden did none of the above before he cut off Russia. And
2018,
we thought he was a foreign genius policy expert, right? So these are the mistakes that we see over and over again. We're kind of done with it. So let's move on to your predictions for 2024 before I cut to a commercial break. I have 2 minutes with you. So as Donald Trump is really considering another White House run, polls show that he's the most popular figure in the Republican Party, and with a really large growing list of candidates gearing up to run, even a Trump diminished by 2 impeachments and mounting legal vulnerabilities could really hold a commanding position in what truly is a fractured multi-candidate primary. Buck, will he run? Does he win? What are your predictions? You have about a minute and a half before commercial.
Oh man, that's a lot. I speak to the Trump whisperers pretty regularly, and people that are still in very close contact with him. They all insist that he is absolutely going to run. So I don't see how he won't run. If he runs, I think there is a chance that Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida will also run. I don't know who would win that primary. I think it would be very interesting. And then I think the Republican candidate, either one of them, would be able to defeat Joe Biden. But does Joe Biden run again? This is one of those decision trees, or one of those, one of those possibility trees that breaks down into many branches very quickly. I mean, there's a lot of if then. So yeah, I think that Donald Trump will run again. I think that if he is the party nominee, he will likely win again. I also, though, think that if Joe Biden sees that Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee, he's actually more likely to run again, because I think the Democrats only believe that Biden is well suited at this point to beat Donald Trump. So That's my whole bunch
I
of
love
things.
it. I love it. Well, we're gonna come back. Don't you move a muscle. We have more to talk about, guys. That's Buck Sexton. Definitely check him out, clayandbuck.com, and you can listen to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show live Monday to Friday from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on iHeartRadio. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. That was our influencer segment brought to you by ogpay.com. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Caldwell Soames Incorporated. Investing globally in transformative businesses like Original Digital Corporation, or ODC, ODC develops advanced consumer and commercial fintech solutions such as OGPay, which will transform the way you manage your money. From sending and receiving money globally for free, paying for goods and services in person and online, pay bills, buy and sell digital currencies, all while earning interest. OGPay is easy to set up, FDIC insured, and your information is secured. Check out ogpay.com.
Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Welcoming back to our influencer segment brought to us by OG Pay. We have the awesome Buck Sexton. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you for having me again.
All right, so we're continuing on our conversation with your predictions for 2024. Will Trump Will Trump run? Will he win? And where we left off. So in 2000, when we look at where the polls are right now, as of 2022, of 3 weeks ago, upward of a dozen candidates could be running, including Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence and his former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, Rick Scott of Florida, and Tim Scott of South Carolina. All could run on the former president's policies. And that's the kicker. Then you have Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. We just spoke about him. He's increasingly seen as Trump's, higher apparent, even by Trump's most loyal supporters, and viewed by Trump allies as his most potential challenger. So there's also Trump fatigue. That might be a real thing, with voters asking themselves whether if they vote for another candidate, they can get the same policies without all the baggage. What do you say to all of this? It's a lot to unpack, but you have President Trump, who set up an entire team, and now that very team is potentially going to be running. What do you say to that?
I would just step back and say that in American politics, we're seeing a resistance to the natural order of things, which is that people accumulate a lot of power and then don't want to give it up and hand it over to the next generation. I think this is actually a really big issue when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. Nancy Pelosi is too old for her job, for example. You look at someone like Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein is not able to do the job anymore and hasn't been for a long time, and her staff knows that. But she's a institution in Democrat politics in California. So the fact that she is effectively going through full-on cognitive decline, I mean, and not even at the Biden level where it is able to be hidden at some points of the day, her staff knows she's having senior moments. She forgets things. She doesn't know what's going on. That person's a U.S. senator still. This should not be allowed to happen. Biden's too old for the job, obviously. Everyone's seen that. And Democrats, I think, have been reckless in pretending that wasn't obvious from the beginning. So with that, I do actually try to apply principle as such and not just make it situational depending on who I like. I mean, I do think the biggest challenge for Trump will be, you mentioned Trump fatigue, the January 6th thing and all the circus around that, and that's not helpful. But I don't think the Trump base, I don't think Trump voters care enough about that for it to be an issue that would block him. But Trump is going to be 77, 78. Something like that, I think.
He's not young either.
It's too old. This is the problem. And if it's a choice between too old Trump or way too old Biden.
Oh gosh, you can't.
Obviously, that's an easy decision. But I'm just saying, if we're looking at choices within the GOP, and remember, the other thing that Trump has, and this isn't insignificant, is he'd only be a one-termer. So he's running to be a one-termer, which means now you're going to have to go through the whole election shenanigans all over again. Really, you're basically going to get, a year or 18 months of Trump, and then it's the midterms, and then it's the reelection.
Yeah.
of some, or rather not re-election, the new election
New
from
election.
somebody else, because it can't be Trump. So those are, I think, the headwinds against him. Look, I make no secret. I think Governor DeSantis has done an amazing job in Florida. I think that anybody who lives in are you New York year-rounder resident too?
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
I think anybody who's been through New York during the pandemic and escaped to the free state of Florida feels this debt of gratitude of just helping keep their sanity.
Absolutely.
And so I used to go down there all the time. My now fiance and I have been down there together.
Congratulations to you and Carrie.
Thank you very much. Very exciting stuff. And we're certainly considering very at length or considering very seriously a Florida move. So look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. I mean,
The numbers don't lie.
Thousands of people have moved to Florida because of the state. People say, "Oh, it's the warm weather and the taxes." Yeah, of course, but it's had that forever. It's had that for decades. It's had that for as long as any, you or me, if you or I've been alive. So what changed the last few years? It's a state that's actually run properly. Unlike New York, unfortunately, which is run by imbeciles.
By imbeciles, yeah. I couldn't agree more. Well, listen, we share the same ideals. We share the same kind of commentary here. I'm a registered Republican myself. I do think that the system is flawed. I do think that the party has its issues. I probably would consider myself more of an independent than anything else at this point. But when you look back at our founding fathers and you look at how old they were, none of them were really old at all. They were actually ranging between 18 years old and 35 years old. Maybe you had, one or two outliers in their 70s. But in general, to your point, these people are just too old to be running a country that is filled with so much energy, with so much potential, with so much beauty, but yet they're weaponizing, and drawing a line in the sand between if you're a registered Republican or a Democrat or what demographic you are, the color of your skin. Now, all of a sudden, white people, you can argue, have become the minority in certain places. So there's way too much change going on. There's a lot of turmoil. And as a mom, even living in the tri-state area in New York City specifically, I no longer feel safe. I no longer feel like this is the city that I came to when I was 17 and was signed to elite and, had an incredible time when I would walk on the street without ever fearing and watching my back. Now I don't even take the subway. So this is not the city that I grew up to love. And it's been handed over to a pack of morons, AOC included, and all of her constituents. But that's a different conversation. I could keep going on and on. Listen, Buck, we'll pick this up again soon. I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on. It was fun chatting.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Guys, that was Buck Sexton. Check him out on the gram at Buck Sexton. Head to their website, clayandbuck.com, and you can listen to the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show live Monday to Friday from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on iHeartRadio. You're listening to A Moment of Zen on 710 WOR, the voice of New York. That was our influencer segment brought to you by OG Pay. We'll be right back after this.